Basic Brewing Radio is sponsored in part by the American Homebrewers Association. Give or receive an American Homebrewers Association membership by December 31st and select a free brewing book of your choice. This holiday season, purchase a one-year membership and choose from 60 different beer and brewing books to meet your goals. Visit homebrewersassociation.org/basicbrewing for offer details. Hurry! This offer ends December 31st. homebrewersassociation.org/basicbrewing. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, December 14th, 2023. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Chris Colby of Beer and Gardening Journal and I are joined by beer author and historian Peter Symons to talk about the Pre-prohibition American Lager that I brewed and Chris and I formulated, and to help us formulate a new recipe for a semi-traditional oat malt stout. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing, and many thanks to everybody who is helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. Financial supporters have already seen the video episode that I'm planning to release to the general public this week. It's the one about my small batch smoked rot beer. That's a German red beer. That's a delicious little beer with just the right amount of smoke, in my opinion. Financial supporters also got the recipe and the behind-the-scenes video showing me a little bit frustrated by the side of the brew pot as I had to boil for an additional hour to get the gravity that I wanted. I think it just simply started with too much water. You know, sometimes those little 2-gallon beers are a little quirky. I'm in the process of editing the video that Steve and I shot doing a DVD commentary of our very first Introduction to Extract Homebrewing DVD. So on the screen, you'll see Steve and me on the left-hand side from present day, and then us on the right-hand side from almost 20 years ago. If we only knew how much of a journey that DVD started. That was before the podcasts, before YouTube, before homebrew cons, before all the brewery tours, interviews, experiments. We were just babies. Financial supporters should get that bonus video before the end of the year, as well as participants in the annual disaster show. I've got a bunch of letters already, and I'm setting the deadline as this Friday, the 15th. That's this week. To send me your tales of brewing gone wrong. You can send them to james@basicbrewing.com. Steve and I will be getting together to read those soon and record that end-of-the-year show. I did something really fun this past weekend. I made mead from the first ever homebrew mead ingredient kit sent out from our sponsors, friends and sponsors, Ricky and Kelly, from Groenfeld.com. That's right, Ricky and Kelly are now not only selling ingredient kits, but mead equipment kits, too. They're offering 1 and 5-gallon sizes of both equipment kits and ingredient kits. I chose the 1-gallon veneer ingredient kit. I've already got all the gear. And the kit came with really delicious Vermont wildflower honey, yeast nutrient, a bit of oak, and enough corks for my bottles. It also came with some really well-written instructions to take first-time mead makers through the process. The starting gravity was 1100, so it's going to be a big one. And if the flavor of that honey is any indication, it's going to taste incredible, too. And while I was buying my mead ingredient kit on Groenfeld.com, I picked up a mixed case of Groenfeld and Havoc craft meads, too. But that hop swarm, dry hop mead, is something else. It probably might be my favorite. Check out the new homebrew mead, equipment, and ingredient kits, along with all the honey-based deliciousness from our good friends and sponsors, Ricky and Kelly at Groenfeld.com. That's GROENNFELL. Okay, first off, I went into this conversation thinking Peter and Chris already knew each other. They're both talented writers and brewers and have been around forever, so I took it for granted that they had met or corresponded before. Well, they hadn't, so sorry guys. Peter is the author of 6 O'Clock Brews, Bronzed Brews, and Guile Brews, And Chris is the author of the Homebrew Recipe Bible, Methods of Modern Homebrewing, and How to Brew Hard Seltzer. And I'm just some guy who gets to talk with them. Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
We're here to talk about our classic American Pilsner, or our pre-prohibition American Lager that we formulated last time we were together. And I think I quipped on that show, it doesn't matter what the recipe is really, because nobody's around anymore who cares or knows anything about that kind of thing. This gives me an opportunity to introduce our special guest, a man who knows about those sort of things, author and a beer historian, Peter Symons. Welcome back, Peter.
Thanks, James. Good to be back. It's been a while. Yeah, I was a bit intrigued by your development program, and I thought I'd like to have my 5 cents worth.
Now you're the author of 6 O'Clock Brews, Bronzed Brews, and Guile Brews, and those are books on historical British and Australian beers, right? So what do you know about American beers, the history of American beers?
Well, I'm working on my next book, and I have been for a while now, probably 2 or 3 years. What I found in my travels was that I had initially thought that Australian brewing was not particularly influenced by Germanic brewers. But in my research, I found that a guy called Augustus J. Metzler had come from the US on behalf of the Fordler Vacuum Fermentation Company of Rochester, New York, and he had set up a brewery in Melbourne and one in Sydney. So that set me off thinking, okay, I've got a very small snippet of his business case for when he set up the brewery in Sydney that gave me a grist of rice and malt. And check hops. And I thought, right, okay, that's a good start. And then I started looking into beers of the US of that period. So we're talking 1890s, something like that. So trawling around the internet in the middle of the COVID thing, I bumped into the Hagley Library. I think that's how you pronounce it. And at the Hagley Library, they had a clip on the screen that just showed the front of a brewer's book. So I got in touch with the reference librarian, a lady called Linda Gross, and after lots of toing and froing, she located the document, scanned it for me, and found. And what I found within that was a brewer's log of beers brewed in 1904, 1905. Now, that gave me actual data, because I love data. You know, original brewing records are the wonderful thing. And that gave me a good background, and it set me off then looking into the textbooks of the day, which were typically written in German, because that was the brewing language of the period in the US. Really got into the details, and I wrote an article for Zymergy to capture all the information, because it wasn't really what I needed for my book, but I didn't want to lose the fact that I'd spent all this time finding it. So my big takeaway is from your chat about what you were going to do about constructing the beer was this idea of pre-prohibition. Well, that's sort of 1920 back to 1860, isn't it, if you look at it literally? And there's also an implicit view, because you look back through the lens of today, an implicit view that that's a Pilsner. Well, that's also not likely to be true, because lager and Pilsner were likely to be two different beers. Okay, so depending how you view your beer. So now your beer looks like a Pilsner beer to me. It's very pale, very light. But there were in this period lots of beers based on Munich beers. So Dunkels, dark ales, that sort of thing. Lots of different types of lagery beer, not just Pilsner.
In formulating the recipe, we called it Pre-prohibition American Lager, and then someone else chimed in at some point and said, "Oh, the classic American Pilsner is what other people or what people generally refer that to that as." First of all, if you want to read Peter's article, it's in the March-April 2023 issue of Zymergy magazine. And if you're a member of AHA, you can find those articles online. It's called Recreating the Past, Discovering the Beers of Early 20th Century America. And it's got a few recipes for different styles in there. It's an interesting article.
There is a difference between the standard American lager, which was pretty much a draft beer that was sold in the bars, and the export beer. The export beer tended to be pasteurized, and obviously it was. I think it was the same base beer, but perhaps just amped up a little bit. The basic building blocks you had in your beer were base malt, cluster hops. Did you go with rice or maize? I can't remember.
I can read the recipe. It's a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch. 5 pounds or 2.27 kilograms of 6-row, 2.5 pounds or 1.13 kilograms of American 2-row, and 3.5 pounds or 1.6 kilograms of flaked rice. So we went with, instead of corn, we used rice. I attempted to do a step mash. we might get into that a little bit later, and sort of did what I was trying to do, and then I used 20 grams of nugget at 14.1% alpha acid for 60 minutes, and that was the extent of the hops. And I chilled down to 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 13°C, and pitched L26 Pilgrimage with a 2-liter starter. So I was a good boy this time. I made a starter. I chilled down to actual lager fermentation temperature. I kept it in the kegerator while it fermented, and then did a diacetyl rest. The original gravity 1053, final gravity 1007 for an ABV of 6%. And Chris, you've got the beer in front of you. Peter, you're too far away. Shipping and time and regulations probably prevented me from sending it to you. But what do you think of the beer, Chris?
It's good. It's maybe a little too estery in the nose. Like it seems like I made a run. Like not, it's very drinkable. And like it's maybe like for me, like I like all my beers super dry. It's maybe just a little bit too much for versus what I was looking for. It's a great beer, but versus what I'm looking for, it's maybe a little bit more body and sweetness.
To me, I don't know that I would want it any more dry, just for my preference.
I'm a freak.
But when you say estery, do you think that's a fermentation flaw, or what would you say?
Yeah, there's a whiff of banana in there that probably shouldn't be there in a lager, and but it's mild. It's not, if I was at a picnic and there was a keg of this, I would be, all over it.
Of course, my nose doesn't work as well as yours probably, but I'm not getting that. But I was happy with it.
You should be.
The mashing profile, I started with at 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60°C, and I stayed there for 15 minutes. And then I attempted to ramp up slowly up until to 152 or 67. And I was lazy and I didn't use the recirculating pump on my brew in a bag system, and I should have, because just stirring the mash while I was trying to raise up the temperature rather than recirculating it from the bottom and then spraying it on the top, it wasn't as effective as if I had actually done it the right way. So it took a little longer to get up to temperature. But once I did get at that second temperature, I stayed there for 90 minutes.
What was the second temp?
152 or 67 C.
Nice.
So thinking about that grain bill, Peter, is that something similar to what might have been done back in the day in the United States pre-prohibition?
Well, 6-row was it's seen today as being the majority of the type of barley that was used. They also use Chevalier, which is a two-row, and that was identifiable from the brewing manuals of the day. For somebody that didn't want to use flaked rice, I found that brown rice malt syrup works just as well. That's just add that to the kettle. There were descriptions of the day where they talked about it. It wasn't as pale, the base malt wasn't as pale as a Pilsner malt, and it wasn't as dark as a Munich malt. So perhaps a blend of either a blend or use a Vienna malt, which would give you a little bit more color and perhaps a little bit more flavor from the Vienna. But yeah, I mean, what you've got there, the mashing by using flaked rice is a lot easier than doing a cereal mash.
Right.
But yeah, instant polenta is quite good if you were going to use maize instead. That's unflavored instant polenta, I must say, without any of the extra things they tend to put in it.
And what about the ABV? Would 6% be a little too high for back then, or did it depend on the brewery?
At least in the 18th. So if we say pre-prohibition is the 20th century, let's talk about the 19th century, because the positioning of the brewers was they had a non-intoxicating drink called a lager. And there's plenty of analysis in the newspapers where they were making the point that their lager was perhaps only 4% ABV. Sometimes a little bit difficult to tell 4% ABW, 5% ABV, but we're sort of in the 4.5, 5 range, which would be compared to an ale of the day, which might be 6, 7, 8%. So if you're at 6, you're probably a bit much. 4.5, I think, would be a good compromise. And if you wanted a quaffing one for summer, like we're just about to hit, 4.2 is probably a sweet spot.
If you were to, so you would tweak the recipe by adding some Vienna malt in there to give it a little more color, a little more interesting malt character. Back off on the alcohol level, maybe to be a little bit more authentic for a quote unquote pre-prohibition lager.
Yeah, I have made, and my good mate Barry Cranston, who's much better at lagers than I am, has also made the 4.2% recreation that I've come up with for an Australian version of an 1890s lager. It does finish up in the 1019, 1020s. So it does have an OG around 1050, 1054, something like that. It doesn't come across as being overly sweet. But it is quite quaffable, and Yeah. So I wouldn't have a problem if your final gravity was a lot higher than at least 10, 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is that a byproduct of the mashing techniques, or not the mashing techniques, but the malting techniques back then? I mean, were worts less fermentable because of different technologies?
Well, that's probably a discussion in itself. They seem to control the fermentability of the wort by the way they did the adjunct mash. So the way they did the cereal mash would determine the overall fermentability of the wort from my reading of the textbooks. So you knew with your cereal mash that you were going to get an amount of extract, and then you varied the temperature and time of the main mash. So if you mashed and went up through a step mash effectively very quickly, you would have a much higher residual gravity, more dextrins in your final beer. And if you did it slower, you got it more fermentable and whatever. So they did use the mashing technique. I think you can say in most cases the quality of the malt as a function of the quality of the barley was not as good as it would be today.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the techniques that they employed, like double decoction, was to get over the very poor quality of the malted barley that the brewers had to deal with. We don't have to do that today, so single infusion for these types of beers is a lot simpler, and the modern malts are fine.
Yeah. Well, any more thoughts on the on our pre-prohibition, quote unquote pre-prohibition American lager, Chris? You're done with yours already.
Almost. Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I don't think it's surprising that there were a variety of beers. I mean, I'm guessing some pre-prohibition lagers were pilsners, but there might have been sort of what we today call, Viennas or red lagers, and yeah, that's all interesting.
Any final thoughts, Peter, before we move on to our new beer, our next beer?
No, I think you've under the circumstances, you've both done a commendable job.
Do they have backhanded compliments down in Australia?
I wouldn't know what they are.
Under the circumstances equals, given how many beers you guys have had today,
or given that you're idiots, you're doing all right.
Yeah, you do okay.
I didn't say that. You said that. I couldn't possibly comment.
Our friends Desiree and Dave of HighGravityBrew.com are having a sale on money. Every year about this time, Desiree and Dave offer High Gravity gift certificates for 10% off. So you or Santa can buy gift certificates of $10, $25, $50, $100, $500, or even $1,000. And a 10% discount will be applied at checkout. Why the big denomination? Well, Desiree says one customer bought enough gift certificates last year to get himself a Warthog electric brewing system and save 10%. So they wanted to make it easier for people to do that again this year. Whether you shop at HighGravityBrew.com for electric gear or for ingredients using the Build Your Own Beer page, or for excellent beer or wine kits, buy yourself a gift certificate and save 10%. Or tell Santa about it. This deal is for a limited time, so hurry on over to family-owned and operated HighGravityBrew.com and check it out and get your 10% gift certificate discount and on family-owned and operated HighGravityBrew.com. That's HighGravityBrew.com.
I do have an opportunity now to put you on the straight and narrow.
Uh-oh. Because of our next beer?
Indeed.
Okay, so I gave you the opportunity to suggest the next beer in the recipe development series, and what did you suggest, Peter?
Well, I'd like to hear Chris's take on this first, if that would be possible.
Well, you suggested an oatmeal stout, right?
Yes.
Now, what is it about oatmeal stout that you find appealing, or that you think we should tackle?
Well, I think oatmeal stout is a style that is underrepresented. Most people would make a dry stout, or at the other end of the spectrum, straight up to imperial. But an oat malt stout, well constructed, is a nice quaffable drink. And you're going into a wintry season. I thought it would be the right sort of style to have a go at.
And you say oat malt stout. Is that different from just an oatmeal stout or an oat stout? I mean, I'm thinking, in formulating the recipe, of course we haven't gotten down that far, but I was thinking maybe flaked oats or something like that. But you're suggesting specifically to use malted oats in the recipe?
Well, this is the history coming through, because you could go oat malt, which is relatively easy to get now, since all these people are making some sort of NEPA thing with oats in. Oatmeal would be flaked oats, or in the big breweries of the era, would be proper oats that they would process just like any other raw grain. So yes, there is a discussion, I think, to be had around the differences between oat malt and oatmeal.
Chris, what's your interpretation of when you think of an oat stout or an oatmeal stout? What comes to mind? How do you describe that beer? What do you think of?
Like a really good oatmeal stout or oat stout. I mean, it can be wonderful. It's like it's got some nice roastiness. The oats could bring out like, in the versions that I like, there was a time in American brew pubs where oatmeal stouts were fairly common. I mean, that day has sort of passed, but it was common for that to show up on the menu. And the best ones had this like oatmeal cookie aroma to them, and they were roasty, but they weren't as roasty as like a dry stout or an imperial stout. And they were just well balanced. And I mean, they were just a really, drinkable beer. It made well, it can be really great. Made poorly, and like any beer, can be less great, let's say.
From a historical perspective, Peter, and I'm assuming, are you talking about the beers from Great Britain or from Australia, or where are you coming from?
Well, let's perhaps begin from the beginning, and this might explain the interesting finessing around the type of oats to be used. So oats have been used for a really, really long time in brewing. They got a lot of beta glucan, and you've got several different forms of oat. You've got oat malt, you've got flaked or rolled oats, or you've got whole oats, which are called roats, apparently. So this is typically a Scottish sort of thing. You can get malted oats. I'm pretty sure you would be able to get malted oats from Brees in the US, but they're quite easy to get around the world, I think. Most of the UK maltsters have them, and they do in Australia, Voyager and Gladfield in New Zealand. So you've got lots of different types of oats. The flavor impact of perhaps using instant oats versus rolled oats, whether that's making a mouthfeel or a texture change. If you use groats, which are the whole oats, you're into cereal mashing. So I think we put that to one side. I'm not sure about some of the more modern ones like Simpson's Golden Naked Oats. possibly a little bit too much crystally things going on there. And my question is, malted oats for the best flavor? Not sure. The sort of descriptors that Chris was starting to mention, I think what we're aiming for in an oat, let's just call it an OMS, that covers both oatmeal and malted oats. In the OMS, you're looking for creamy. The flavor descriptor that keeps coming up when you look at oatmeal stouts is a creaminess. Add in some smoothness from the mouthfeel, silky. So there's a creaminess and mouthfeel thing, probably coming from the beta-glucans, that is quite distinctive from the malted oats. I think you get a drier finish from flaked oats, in my view. Most people will tell you that Maclay in Scotland was the first brewer of oat malt stout because they patented it in 1895. However, the patenting process allows others who have a claim that perhaps it's not novel to challenge within a couple of weeks. And the challenger was Rose's oatmeal stout from England, near Hull at the time. Both of these recipes were in the patent. It's very rare to find a patent that is of a recipe. So they always talked about the improvements to the process. And the recipe was the example of how you use the process. Long story short, we should be grateful. 1890, Rose patented his stout, and it came with a recipe. Now that recipe, with a bit of interpretation, 85% mild ale malt, 10% oat malt, 5% black malt.
Oh.
We just deal with the malting side. The Maclay's oat malt stout, as opposed to oatmeal stout, it was, you'll like this, almost 71% of oat malt. So when they said that they were patenting an oat malt stout, they actually meant it. And then 11% pale malt, 8% invert sugar, bit of amber malt, some cane sugar, and a fair bit of caramel. You've now got the situation, you have two patents, and you've got to work out who's going to win. The Maclay patent was opposed by Rose, and in classic British, including Scottish tradition, they've ended up with an adjudication that Messrs. James Rose and Co.'s patent, who are the first patentees and users of malting oats for brewing purposes, has to be put into the Maclay's reference in their patent, whereas they're only claiming other things. So what you have are two winners that led to a lot of disputes later on as to who actually said what.
So in our modern interpretation, which way should we go? I mean, it seems to me that I mean, I do brew in a bag, so I'm not afraid of a stuck mash, stuck louder ton. But should we go extreme, and go for a heavy percentage of actual, malted oats? Or should we go, in sort of a more sort of modern interpretation? Chris, what are your feelings?
There's a lot of different kinds of oats you can put into an oatmeal stout, and there's a lot of different interpretations of oatmeal stout. So, I mean, a lot of it is just what are you trying to brew? Like if we're trying to brew like an authentic, authentic-ish, that's best we can do. Historical interpretation, that's one thing. If we're trying to brew a more modern, what are people doing, and what is doable as a home brewer, that's a different thing. There's just a range of possibilities.
What do you suggest, Peter?
Once the patent had run out, in the UK, everybody had oatmeal stouts. they did a lot of party girl brewing, so they could put in less than 1% of oats of whatever sort, and claim that it was oatmeal stout.
Mm.
And there was a lot of that about. So you could go as low as 1%, but the question is, why bother?
Yeah.
So let's rule out that. 80% is probably an interesting one to try, but not a mainstream beer.
Mm-hmm.
I think somewhere around 25% of oat malt would be a good starting point, and then pale malt and possibly a bit of crystal, and then some black patent malt to round it off. I did contact Val Allen, who's got the not that I've had it for many years now, the Barney Flats oatmeal stout. I contacted him a while ago, and he gave me the recipes for from 2011, 2015. Their oatmeal stout is a very different beast.
Mm.
It's only around 10% oats, and it's a lot less bitter. It's possibly has the appearance of being much sweeter because of the lack of bittering hop in there.
Mm.
I think somewhere between the 10. I've not really mentioned what the BJCP think about things.
Good.
It's guidelines. They're not recipes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you do want enough oats in there to get that smooth, silky, creamy, oatmeal-y thing going on. Somewhere between 15 and 25. I would go 25%, and I'd go malted oats. I know Barry Cranston, he uses flaked oats, and he makes a very nice stout as well. Perhaps it's a nuance whether you use you get the dryness from the flaked or rolled oats.
Well, let's. I don't know that I've used malted oats. So, Chris, have you got your spreadsheet open? Shall we?
I do.
Shall we build a recipe? And what's the original gravity that you think we should be shooting for, Peter?
Well, let's not do OG so much as ABVs. So 5.2, 5.4 ABV, probably 1060.
Mm.
And I think you do need quite a high finishing gravity with this type of stout. Not that it's not a sweet stout like something you put lactose in.
Right.
It's not a milk stout, but it's sweeter than the dry stout. Yeah.
So should we just use American two-row or American pale brewer's malt?
I don't think the base malt is going to make a huge amount of difference.
Right.
Particularly if you're going to put something in there that's going to give you that, I think Chris mentioned that cookie thing. You might want to put some amber or biscuit in there.
Hmm.
Question mark?
I think for a oatmeal stout, like one thing as a base malt, something like an English pale ale malt is a pretty good start. I mean, I agree that like that of all the things in the recipe, that's probably getting one thing that matters the least, but something like an English pale ale malt might be a good start.
If you had the Marisotto, inverted commas, something like that.
Yeah.
That would give you some biscuity without having to add any biscuit.
Yep.
What do you think about start with, and forgive my measurements, but about 8 pounds of Marisotto maybe to start with, just to put something on the board.
For a 5-gallon recipe, yeah, that's a good start. We can alter it later.
Maybe 2 pounds of the malted oats.
Yeah, that puts us as 20% malted oats, and that brings our OG to 56.
And we'll need to darken it up.
Sure.
So black patent.
That's one possibility. Also chocolate. Yeah. Also, roasted unmalted barley. All those are all good.
I have wondered about using because I've got several kilos of it, crisp brown malt. That gives a nice coffee flavor.
Hmm.
This is quite significant because probably roasted barley is going to work against your silky creamy because of its general dryness. But that's a function of really how much bittering you might be doing as well. So I think you would have to have less bittering if you use the roasted barley. Uh, my preference has been to use black paint and malt. I think it does give a nice flavour, which is strange from something that's been burnt to a crisp. Or you could do a blend, of course.
Sure. So shall we do the brown malt and some black patent in there as well?
How much brown malt would we need for a 5-gallon recipe? Or how much? What percentage?
I think you probably only want about 6% dark malt because you've got to get it. It's got to look like a stout. The trouble with
Right.
brown malt, it'll come out as a brown stout if you put too much in. But you could always put some caramel in. That's always a good standby. So yeah, 5 or 6%, I would think. That should bring you up to what, about 1060 something?
5% of the total dark malts.
Yeah, if we put 2/3 of a pound of brown malt in, that's about 6%. And that bumps us up to about 32 SRM, which is pretty good. It's a brown verging on black. And it bumps our OG up to 1058. And we can bring that back down if we need to.
And then round it out with some black malt.
We could do that. A little, I think a little crystal in an oatmeal stout can be good. Just that there's a little bit of sweetness that mixes with that silkiness and the roast and all that. That would be my interpretation, but I'm like mostly influenced by like 1990s style brew pub oatmeal stouts, not historically accurate.
Some pale crystal, yeah. You don't want overly caramel, I don't think.
No, you don't want too much like the toffee stuff, but just like a little background sweetness.
Or you could just put raw sugar in, which will give you that same general feeling. Perhaps. I'm quite a fan of using sugars. I think they're underappreciated.
You say raw sugar. Is that? I mean, that's different from just table sugar.
Not white sugar. What would you call it? Demerara, perhaps. It's brownish.
Brown sugar.
But not brown sugar, brownish. So it's raw. You have caster sugar, golden caster sugar. I mean, it's all the same stuff, but you lot call it all different names. That's very confusing for us people in the rest of the world.
Or we could just use like 20 Lovabond Crystal.
That might be easier for you, yes.
Yeah.
We know what that is.
What if we, for a 5-gallon recipe, put in half a pound of 20 Crystal? That comes in at about 4.5% of the. That shouldn't be too cloying. Bumps our OG up a bit, of course.
And then do we still need to darken it a bit?
Well, we're at 34 SRM. That's not so bad. Like I don't think an oatmeal stout needs to be jet black. I mean, like a solid brown. At least again, I'm measuring it against the sort of 90s style brew pub, OMSs that I liked.
Right. Well, I'm open either way. I'm like the wind.
Or what if we kicked in? I like chocolate malt What if we kicked in a tiny amount of chocolate malt just to boost the color?
Okay.
A little bit of tiny bit of chocolate malt flavor.
Okay.
Just a little bit, like a quarter pound. Quarter pound puts us at 45 SRM, which is solid. That's dark.
Okay.
And yet that's not going to be too aggressively roasty. So we got pale ale malt, which we can dial down if we want, because we're in the 6% ABV range right now, roughly, depending on what our final gravity is. Got 2/3 of a pound of brown malt, quarter pound of chocolate malt, half a pound of Crystal 20, and 2 pounds of flaked oats, which is that puts us, now that we've added more stuff, that puts us at 17% or 18%.
Now we're using oat malt instead of flaked oats, right?
Right? Yeah. What if we bumped up the flaked oats? We'll go to 3 pounds, and then we'll knock the pale ale malt down a couple pounds, and let's see what that gets us. There we go. Now we're in the 5 point, something range.
So 6 pounds of maris otter, 3 pounds of oat malt, 2/3 of a pound of brown malt, half a pound of 20 level Blanc crystal, and 1/4 pound of chocolate malt.
Yeah. That's our recipe as it stands for 5 gallons.
Cool. I'm going to brew this beer with A10 Darkness from our friends and sponsors at Imperial Yeast. And then I'm betting the next beer will probably be a lager because I've got 2 packs of L25 Hüge, which is the current seasonal yeast strain from Imperial. Hüge, or is it Hüge, is a Northern European lager yeast used in Pilsner-style beer that complements significant hop additions. But Eben from Imperial says it's very versatile as well. He says he knows of brewers brewing Baltic porters with it. And Steve Wilkes brewed an oak-aged IPA experiment, you might remember, last year on the video show with Hüge, or Hüge. Whatever I brew, and however I pronounce it, I know those 200 billion cells in each easy-to-open package of Imperial yeast will be ready to handle the job. My stir plate's usually dusty because I don't make starters for moderate gravity 5-gallon ale batches. Now, for lagers or higher gravity beers, sure, I'll go to the extra effort. Go to the extra effort yourself and ask your local homebrew store about L25 Hüge, or is it Hüge, from Imperial Yeast, and check out all the dependable deliciousness at imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. Happy, Peter?
Well, I do wonder about. You're obviously doing a non-hopped version.
Well, that hops.
Yeah, we'll have. I mean, that's just the grain bill. We're going to be dry hopping with 4 ounces of Amarillo. So
only 4 ounces. I mean, I'm disappointed.
Not really.
That reminds me, I had somewhere in Australia, which will be anonymous. You would think if you asked for a stout with an Irish name, you'd get an Irish stout. But this thing, and I do call it a thing, had been hopped with mosaic.
Yeah.
Nice.
To the nth degree, and I couldn't drink it. It was horrible. Anyway, that's just by the by.
Speaking of hops, I'm assuming just a bittering charge at the beginning of the boil, and that's it, right?
Well, I would suggest mostly bittering at the beginning, and it doesn't really matter too much about the hop at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So you could use up a few things.
Yeah,
I've
got some partial bags in the freezer.
Yep, they'd be good candidates, and very traditional in a stout to use up all your old hops. But I would suggest dry hopping. It gives a certain something, but dry hopping with an appropriate hop. Something with a bit of edge, so something with some bite. I quite like Cluster. You could probably use Cascade, but you don't want to get too fruity. But yeah, something. Going back to the olden days when stouts weren't bland and boring, they usually had a bit of a bite to them, either from acidity or something. And the or something equivalent can be a little bit of careful dry hopping, I think.
So how are you thinking? Just like maybe an ounce in a 5-gallon barrel, 28 grams in a 19-liter batch?
Well, in old money, which is a pound per imperial barrel, is 2.8 grams per litre. So 2.8 times 20 is whatever it is. Yeah, so a couple of ounces.
Okay.
But probably do it cold, and it's just to give it a little bit. of something.
And what would you say the IBUs as far as the bittering hops would go?
If what OG are we, about 1060?
We were right around there. Now we're about 1056 with an
Okay.
ABV of around 5 point something, depending on final.
Yeah. You probably need a decent whack because you've got it's going to be fairly chewy otherwise, isn't it? It needs something. So probably about 50 IBUs,
Wow.
Tinseth. Well, it's a stout. It's the other end of the spectrum is you could go down to 20 odd, split the difference, say about 40, something
Okay.
like that.
What was your target? It's like 60?
Well, it was more or less gravity unit, bittering unit 1-to-1. If you think that's going to be a bit much given your particular bill, so Sam Smith Oatmeal Stout is 5% ABV, 1050, 32 IBUs, for example. The Barney Flats is only 14 bittering units, so that's a bit of an outlier, really. And some of the older examples that I've got are, as I say, almost 1-to-1. So I think you could say, as things have evolved over time, the bittering has reduced. So if you went 30, I think you'd be fairly.
Well, I think 40. I mean,
30 to 40.
Yeah, 40 sounds good to me.
It'll smooth out after a bit of storage.
Yeah,
In a
the
5-gallon
equivalent
batch, an ounce of 12% alpha acid hops ends up at about 45, somewhere in there.
well, I'm probably going to look in my, like I say, in my freezer, and collect the little partial ounces and things down there to get around 40 IBUs. And I'm thinking of using Imperial A10 Darkness as the yeast. Eben from Imperial sent me a packet of it. So,
What sort of attenuation is it?
71 to 75%.
Oh, okay. So that's English ale range.
Yeah.
Yeah, 72-ish. Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently the origin is said to be Irish. So we can guess as to where it came from. It sounds like we've got a beer.
Well, you haven't talked about the mashing because if you're going to end up with a fair bit of residual, I mean that's going to do 72%. I tend to be mashing, I think somewhere in the 67 or possibly a little more, depending. You haven't got any sugar in, have you? So yeah, 67-ish perhaps.
So 152 degrees Fahrenheit.
You've used the F word.
Well, I think that sounds good. It'll be fun, if nothing else. And unfortunately, we won't be able to share it with you, Peter. But you can.
Oh, not again! I've given you plenty of notice this time.
You need to come up here.
Can I ask Peter this question? There's a thing that American homebrewers do when they make a beer with flaked oats, and that is they spread the flaked oats on a cookie sheet and they bake them in the oven for a while to bring out the aromatics. Would that and it supposedly gives it more of an oatmeal cookie flavor. I think Jamil, I'm not sure, but I think that he at least championed that idea. Like, would it help us if we put some or all of the oat malt, in the oven for a while, just toast it enough to bring out a little bit of the aromatics, or is that going to be detrimental?
I think the way the recipe's been built, it's built to give you the silky, creamy thing. I think you just go to the store and buy some cookies and just dunk them into the finished product. It would be a lot easier. I think it might work with oats, rolled oats or flaked oats in the oven, but there's a lot of faffing about with that. So
I'm anti-faffing.
Good.
I'm on the record. No, I think it's good. I will get those ingredients ordered, and maybe by next month we'll see what's what. Well, Peter, when can we look forward to the book, or is that a bad question to ask?
I went to Adelaide and I found a lot of new information that I'm trying to. I got it to that point where it's 90% complete, and I just had to really just finish off a couple of chapters. And now I've gone back and I'm revisiting things that I thought I'd already done, which is very inefficient. But I can't not include some of this really good stuff that I found in the archives in Adelaide. So I would say in your spring would be a safe bet.
Wow. Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing it, and maybe when it's done, you can come back.
Indeed, I'm going to be very interested to see how your oatmeal stout comes out. Or, sorry, your oat malt stout comes out.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Peter, for playing along.
No worries, as they say.
And Chris, as always, I appreciate you, and you'll be receiving a beer because you don't live on the other side of the world.
I like receiving beers. There, I've said it.
They're in your size and in your color always.
Yeah, they are.
All right, thanks, guys. Well, thanks again to Peter and Chris. I've got ingredients on the way from highdgravitybrew.com. Now I just have to find a day around the holidays when I could brew. A lot of stuff going around nowadays. I'm really looking forward to tasting how this comes out. Really am. Send in your brewing disaster story before Friday of this week. Don't forget, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. So until next time, till then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dutz. And Basic Brewing Radio is a production back to voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.